Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking at virtual reality today, but not just in the way you might think.
Yeah, it's not about the latest games or headsets.
No, not at all. What we're really interested in is how VR is making us rethink, well, pretty much everything. Knowledge, reality, even consciousness. And to help us wrap our heads around all that, we're diving into a book called A Philosophic Journey in Virtuality.
This book, it tackles these big philosophical questions that humans have been asking forever, but it looks at them through the lens of this cutting-edge technology.
Exactly. And one of the first things that jumped out at me was the author's argument about the future of
Oh,
books.
yeah.
I mean, he really seems to think physical books are on their way out. What do you think?
Well, he makes a pretty strong case. Like, he compares reading a scientific text called Elements in two ways, the traditional hard copy and then as an app on an iPad. And he actually found the iPad version to be way more enriching.
Really?
Yeah, because he could interact with the diagrams, really
Mm.
explore the concepts in a dynamic way.
So it's not just reading words on a screen.
No, not at all.
It's about how digital technology can actually change the way we understand things. Has that ever happened to you? Like, have you ever had an experience where interacting with a digital text, you know, really made something click for you in a way it wouldn't have on a page?
All the time. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
We're not just passively absorbing information anymore.
Right.
We're interacting with it, manipulating it.
It's almost like knowledge itself is becoming this fluid thing.
Exactly. And, that leads to another really interesting idea in the book, this idea of global positioning intelligence. The author, he calls it GPI.
Okay, GPI, what's that all about?
Well, he basically envisions a future where everything about us, our thoughts, our location, our entire digital footprint, it's all constantly accessible and shared.
Say, like a form of digital telepathy?
You could say that. Yeah, it is a bit like that.
It's kind of exciting and terrifying at the same
I
time.
know, right? Imagine if your every thought and feeling, every like or dislike, it's instantly broadcast to the world. No filter.
Well, the author actually kind of predicted this shift. I mean, years ago, he talks about how he used to post his personal diary entries online, like way before blogging was even a thing.
Oh, wow.
He saw it as an experiment in this, blurring the lines between the private and the public.
Wow, he was way ahead of his time.
Yeah, and what's interesting is he doesn't see this constant sharing as a bad thing. Not at all.
Really?
He actually compares it to the way neurons in our brains are all interconnected and constantly communicating.
Huh.
He argues that humans were wired for connection, that this kind of Google psyche, as he calls it, is just a natural evolution.
It's interesting if you think about it. We already see this happening in certain ways. Like, look at the rise of location-based dating apps.
Oh, yeah, like what?
There's one called Scout. It's got like 5 million subscribers. People are using it to connect based on nothing but their proximity to each other.
Wow.
It's a glimpse into a future where our digital selves are shaping our relationships, our experiences. It's pretty wild.
Makes you wonder, are we ready for this? I mean, a world where we're constantly sharing our inner world with everyone. It's a huge question. But before we go down that rabbit hole, the author kind of throws us a curveball. He introduces this concept of the Chandian effect.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting.
Right. Tell me more.
So, the Chandian effect,
Mm.
it's all about the power of belief to shape our perception of reality. The author tells this story about Fakir Chand. He was an Indian sage.
Okay.
And Chand had these vivid visions, one in particular during wartime where he saw his guru, like right there in front of him.
So these visions were very real to him.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. Fakir later came to believe that these visions weren't actually, external events.
Really?
He thought they were projections of his own mind. His faith, his beliefs, they were so strong, they actually shaped what he saw.
That's kind of mind-blowing. So are you saying that we're not really seeing the world objectively?
Well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of what we experience is actually filtered through our own beliefs?
I mean, think about virtual reality. It can create these experiences that feel so real, so convincing, even though it's all just a simulation.
Exactly. And that's what the Chandian effect gets at. Just like VR tricks our senses, our beliefs might be shaping our everyday experience of reality.
Uh-huh.
We're constructing our own world,
Yeah.
in a way.
It makes you question what's real and what's not.
It really does.
Yeah.
And this whole exploration of reality, it's like we're peeling back layers. We started with books and how we access knowledge,
Yeah.
then moved to the digital world and how it's changing relationships.
And it sounds like we're about to go even deeper.
Oh yeah, we're just getting started. This next layer we're going to, it really delves into the nature of reality itself.
Oh, okay.
The author poses this really intriguing question, like, what if the universe, the whole thing, is actually just a super sophisticated app?
An app.
Yeah, like he uses the analogy of a smartphone, right? We interact with this sleek interface, but underneath all that, there's this whole complex world of code and circuitry that we never even see. His idea is that our perception of reality, it might be kind of like that, like we're only seeing the user-friendly version.
So you're saying we're just swiping and tapping on the screen of the universe, but we don't really understand the code that's making it all run.
Exactly. He actually calls it the rendered universe and suggests our brains, they create this interface for survival, not necessarily to show us the full picture.
Wow, that's pretty wild. But it makes you wonder, I mean, if our brains are rendering this reality, who or what created the underlying code? Like, is there some cosmic programmer out there
That's
who
the
built
big
the...
question, right? The one that's been bugging philosophers and physicists forever.
Yeah.
The author explores some pretty mind-bending possibilities, drawing on ideas from quantum mechanics, information theory, all sorts of stuff.
Like what?
Well, he even talks about Max Tegmark and his mathematical universe hypothesis. Ever heard of that?
I can't say I have.
Okay, so just imagine that the universe, it's not just described by math, it actually is math at its core, I mean. Numbers, they're the fundamental building blocks, and everything we see, stars, planets, even us, it's just a representation of those mathematical structures.
Okay, let me see if I'm following you. So it's like music is more than just the sounds, right? There's this whole mathematical structure underlying the notes, scales, rhythms, and Tegmark is saying the universe is kind of like that.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty wild, huh?
It is. But all this talk about reality being this rendered experience, it makes you think about the downsides of VR too. What happens if these simulated worlds get so good, so compelling, that we start to lose touch with the real world?
The author doesn't shy away from that. He definitely acknowledges the potential pitfalls.
Like what?
Well, addiction, for one. People get so drawn into virtual experiences that they neglect their real-life relationships, responsibilities.
Yeah, because
And there's also concern about, like, a decline in empathy. We spend more time interacting with avatars, less time with real people. It's like we forget how to connect.
he also brings up Jaron Lanier, right? I remember reading about him. Wasn't he one of the pioneers of VR?
Yeah, he was.
But now he's got some serious concerns about it.
Big time. Lanier, he's worried about the potential for manipulation, you know? Like powerful corporations or governments using VR to control our thoughts, beliefs, without us even knowing.
That's creepy.
Yeah, I know. He's really pushing for ethical VR development, stuff that prioritizes human well-being. Wants VR to help us, not control us.
It's a good reminder that every technology has a dark side, even something as cool as VR.
Definitely. But let's not forget the good stuff either. VR has incredible potential to do good in the world.
In what way?
Well, the author talks about how it can be used for education, therapy, even spiritual growth.
Okay, I can see the education part. Imagine learning about history by actually going back in time, or exploring the human body from the inside out. That would be amazing.
Right. The possibilities are
Yeah.
huge. And VR therapy, it's already happening. People are using it to overcome phobias, anxiety, even PTSD. It's like this safe space to confront your fears, practice coping mechanisms.
That's really cool. What about the spiritual growth part? I'm not sure I quite get that.
I know it sounds a little out there, but the author points out these parallels between VR experiences and like ancient spiritual practices, meditation, for example.
Brilliant.
He suggests VR can induce altered states of consciousness,
Yeah.
help people have these insights into the nature of reality, the self.
Wow. So strapping on a headset could be the new path to enlightenment. I'm not sure I'm ready to trade in my meditation cushion just yet, but it's definitely an interesting thought.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in the mystical possibilities, the author brings us back down to earth a bit.
How so?
Well, he reminds us that we've got some real challenges to face as we enter this new era of virtual realities. Practical stuff.
What kind of stuff?
Things like data privacy, the ethics of AI, and then there's the potential for VR to actually widen social inequalities if access isn't equitable.
You're right. Those are all really important considerations.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, even with all that, I'm still incredibly excited about the possibilities. VR has the potential to change everything in ways we're only just beginning to imagine.
It's true. We really are on the cusp of a revolution. VR could reshape everything. How we learn, how we interact, how we understand ourselves. And speaking of the self, that's where our deep dive takes its final turn. We're about to explore the mysteries of consciousness through the lens of virtual reality, of course.
Mhm.
This last part, the author kicks it off with a pretty powerful comparison. He says our brains, they're like the most sophisticated VR headsets ever created.
Yeah, I can see that. We're constantly taking in all this information through our senses, right? Creating
Right.
this mental model of the world.
Exactly. And he points out our brains, they don't necessarily give us this objective picture of reality. What we see, it's shaped by what's important for survival. He brings up Donald Hoffman again, that evolutionary psychologist we were talking about.
Oh, right, yeah.
Hoffman, he argues that evolution designed our perception to prioritize fitness, not truth.
So we're not really seeing things as they are. It's more like we're seeing a version of reality that's helpful for us, keeps us alive.
That's the idea. Hoffman uses this analogy. It's like a desktop interface on a computer.
Okay.
We interact with icons, files, but those are just simplified representations, right? There's all this complex data processes happening underneath. Our brains might be doing something similar, creating this user-friendly interface for a reality that's way more complex than we can even grasp.
So we're living in a simulation.
Kind of, yeah.
A simulation is designed for our survival.
Yeah.
But then it raises the question, what does all this mean for consciousness? Like, is it just a product of our brains or is there something more to it?
That's a big one, a question that's been around forever.
Yeah, and the author, he dives right into that age-old debate. Materialism versus idealism. Right. One says consciousness is a product of the brain. The other says it's fundamental to reality itself.
Exactly. And then he throws in this other idea, panpsychism.
Psychism. Okay, now I know we're getting into the deep end. What's that?
This one says that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe. It's present in everything, not just humans.
So like rocks, trees, everything has some level of consciousness.
That's the basic idea. It's
Mhm.
definitely a radical concept.
Yeah, it is.
The author, he doesn't necessarily say he believes it,
Yeah.
but he presents it as an alternative, you know, a different way of thinking about consciousness. It's like he's saying, hey, let's open our minds to the possibilities.
I like that. Okay, but back to VR for a second. How can this technology actually be used to study consciousness? I mean, if our brains are already creating this kind of virtual reality, can VR help us understand how that works?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The author, he highlights how VR can be this controlled environment, right,
Mm.
for studying perception, cognition, even altered states of consciousness. Researchers are already using it to investigate all sorts of things, like how our brains process visual information, how we navigate virtual spaces, even how we experience empathy in those virtual interactions.
It's like a laboratory for the mind.
Exactly. But of course, whenever you're messing with people's experiences, there are ethical considerations.
Right.
The author, he acknowledges that, talks about the importance of informed consent, transparency, making sure you're not harming the participants in these studies. We got to be careful, use this technology responsibly.
I think that's a theme that keeps coming up. Every time we take a step forward with technology, there's a whole new set of ethical challenges that come with it.
It's true. But there are also incredible opportunities. The author points out, VR can let us experience the world in ways we never could before. Like, imagine seeing the world through the eyes of a bird
Mm.
or a fish. VR can break down the barriers of our perception, let us experience reality in totally new ways.
That would be incredible.
It would. And that leads us to the final thought the author leaves us with. He asks, what happens if we can create and experience any reality we choose in VR? Like, will we start to prefer those virtual experiences over the real world? And if we do, what does that mean for us, for humanity?
It's a question that's both exciting and kind of scary at the same time, isn't it? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored how virtual reality is changing the way we think about books, knowledge, relationships, reality itself, and even consciousness. It's clear that VR has the potential to unlock the mysteries of the mind, push the boundaries of what we thought was possible, but it's a powerful tool, one that we need to use carefully and thoughtfully. So to our listeners, as you explore these virtual worlds, remember to keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep an open mind. Who knows what incredible discoveries await us in these uncharted territories. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.